Thanks, Jamie, and thanks to the Albertson Foundation for the great work that you do here in Idaho and for hosting this event and for inviting me to be a part of it. And I've really enjoyed the opportunity to talk to some of you here prior to this presentation. I want to leave enough time for questions and discussion at the end because that's the important part. As I was saying earlier, we do a lot of work with the National Conference of State Legislatures, with the Council of State Governments, as well as the National Governors Association, because we know that if the work is going to get done in the states to help us achieve our big goal for this country, which I'll talk a little bit more about in a moment, it's people in your position and profession that must help find the solutions to the changes that need to occur, the dramatic changes to make our system work better for all Americans. As I've learned very clearly in my 10 years in Kentucky, the governor proposes, but the legislature disposes. So we need your help. I had the opportunity today while I was here, to listen to the superintendent present to many of you his plan for redesign of K-12 education. I think some of what I say here today about higher education, I hope will seem complementary to that. But I think what we need to recognize most clearly is that we need to think about a different finish line for this education work. It is no longer a high school diploma. If you have a high school dropout prevention program whose goal it is to get people to a high school credential and that's it, you've got the wrong program. Because if you do not, I will tell you, if you took every baby born in Idaho over the next decade and you made sure that every one of those babies graduated from high school, but they stopped there, what you would have created is a generation of working poor. That's what you will have created. You've got to get them to that next level. Now, when I say college, we use college to mean 2-year degrees, 4-year degrees, meaningful workforce valuable credentials. But what we really want to see in the system is all those to be aligned, so that if you get that 1-year credential in an area, it is aligned with that next step for the associate degree and on to the baccalaureate. Because the job market is evolving, and I'll have some data to share with you that I think will be quite striking about what's happening to the labor market. And these jobs are continuing to demand people with higher and higher skills. So even if you get that certificate, you may need to come back later and go higher. And if you do that, you want to make sure that what you did before counted and that you don't need to start from scratch. It is the case that there's nothing you can do for a family to eradicate poverty in that family any more powerful than to reach into that family context and give somebody a college degree. That is fact. I was in Oklahoma at a governor's forum. We do a lot of work with adult learners, which I want to talk a little bit about here, because I know when we think about this, we're all concerned rightly with the K-12 pipeline and the kids, right? But I want to make a case that the kids aren't enough. In fact, in most states, including Idaho, you could, let me just take my message a moment ago and elaborate it. You could take every baby born between now and 2025, our goal date, which I'll get to in a moment, and ensure that they went to college and got a degree. Okay, this is all your new babies. And you would not have the workforce you need in 2025 to be a successful state. You don't have enough of them. You've got to reach back into the adult population, the 25 to 64-year-old workforce, all of those adults with only high school or some college and no degree, or many of them no high school, and get them back in the game educationally if you want to be a successful state. So I was giving this talk about adults in Oklahoma, and this right after the talk, this woman comes up to me with this, holding the pink evaluation sheet that everybody had, and I thought, oh, I'm going to get a just-in-time evaluation of my presentation here. But that wasn't it. What she had done, she'd sat back there and thought about her family. And on that pink sheet, she had tracked out 3 generations. I think it's great-great-grandmother on down. And when they moved to Oklahoma, there was one, her great-great-grandmother was named Ellen. And she had a sister whose name I'm blanking on right now, but she had a sister. Well, Ellen was committed in that when they moved to Oklahoma, that all of her kids were going to go to high school. And there are family stories about long buggy rides to get her kids to the high school. Because remember, there was a time when we thought high school was optional, right? I mean, well, some people need to go. Some people really probably don't need to go. She made sure they did. Her sister did not do that. And then she tracked by generation what happened to the 2 sides of the family. And what you saw was on Ellen's side of the family, the next generation after her kids a significant percentage went to college. And then it kept growing, and it kept growing. And Ellen's great-great-granddaughter is named Ellen, her namesake, will receive her PhD this year. The other side of the family looks very different. There's almost no one that got a college credential or degree. And she said, Dr. Applegate, I got to tell you what our family reunions are like. We all come together. And she said, we got together this year, and this was a bit ago, right out in the midst of this great recession. And she said, on Ellen's side of the family, it's largely professionals. They're healthy. They have not been dramatically hit by this great recession. Their children are all going to college. They're making good salaries. They're doing well. The other side of the family, she said, they're all outside smoking because they're not allowed to smoke in the house because many of them smoke. Many of them are overweight. They were hit hard by this recession. Many of them lost their jobs. It's the story of two sides of the family. And you can repeat that over and over again. The president of our foundation, Jamie Marisotis, his parents were Greek immigrants who did not finish high school. And his father had a twin brother. And it's the same story. His father made sure that his kids went to college. And it's just, you can see the difference in the two sides of the family, the other did not, are dramatic. So we're really talking about saving lives here. This isn't optional anymore. Just like high school is not optional anymore, college is not optional anymore. So why did Lumina has this goal, Goal 2025? My communication people tell me that buried in there somewhere you see the number 60%. But just in case you don't, this is what the goal is. Okay? It's, branding, I don't know. But so the big goal is to increase the percentage of Americans who hold high-quality degrees and credentials to 60% by 2025. We've been stuck at about 40% for 3 decades. 3 decades ago, that was good enough to be number one in the world. It is no longer good enough to be number one in the world. So we're talking about global competitiveness and the health of our own economy. So what would it take for the United States to reach the big goal? It would take us graduating 278,000 graduates per year every year in this country. That's a 6.3% annual increase. We're currently producing 112,000 graduates. I mean, we got this math down. I mean, we know what it's going to take here. And it's going to take 166 additional graduates each year, every year, 166,000 more next, 166,000 more after that for us to reach this goal. Now, that is what we like to call at Lumina an audacious goal. Now, what would it take in Idaho if you took these numbers? And in your packet, you have, I think it may be the last piece in the packet. By the way, I'm going to reference some things in this packet as I go through because there's some rich information in there that the Albertson Foundation has put together for you. But one of the last ones is from our publication called A Stronger Nation Through Higher Education. And it's just a two-page brief. I know legislators don't have a lot of time, so we don't do 10-page briefs. We do 2-page briefs. That I'm going to highlight some of here in a moment. But Idaho needs to increase production by 1,688. I told you we've got this down. 1,688 associate or bachelor's degrees each year between now and 2025. Now, someone asked me today, well, what about credentials? Do they count? We think they should count. The problem for us at a national level right now is we can't count them because we don't have any data to know what credentials really matter in the workplace. I can go to IPEDS, which is the national data source, and tell you how many certificates that higher education awarded last year, but most of them have no workforce value. But if you have certificates here that you know make a difference and you have data, to go back to Jamie's point about data, if you have data to show that people who get those certificates actually are employed at higher rates and make more money and succeed better, I'd say count them. So let's not get into a quibble here over, well, what about credentials? What about degrees? What about 2-year? This is big enough. We don't need to quibble. We need to act. So it's 1,688 per year, an annual increase of 7.2%. Now that still sounds like a lot. But when then you begin to break that down in Idaho, what does Boise need to do? What do different regions need to do? And I can tell you, as we've done this in every state, even when we went to Chicago and said, what does Chicago need to do to reach Illinois' 60% goal? People started to say, well, could be doable. So when you begin to break it down and do it at the ground level, it is doable. And now what are we talking about here? What is it going to take? I want to be real clear. We need to be real clear about this because a lot of times we talk about things like graduation rates. And we do need to raise graduation rates for the success of students. And we have community colleges in this country where the 3-year associate degree graduation rate is 13%. In other words, if you have basically a 1 out of 10 chance of getting out if you go in. So we have 4-year institutions with less than 50% graduation rates. So you're paying a lot of money and you have a 1 in 2 chance. We need to do that. But we could move all of our institutions up to what the top performing institutions are doing now, and we wouldn't get there. What I'm saying here is it's not just about doing better with the students that already get there. It's participation growth times completion growth equals attainment. It's going to take both. We have to open the doors of higher education to larger numbers of students than we've ever seen before, and then we have to make sure that more and more and more of those actually get to a degree and credential. That's what it's going to take. Now, why is this important? First of all, as I've just said before, but I'll reiterate it, in the emerging economy, college is a prerequisite to a middle-class life. It doesn't mean if you get a degree, you're guaranteed it. I mean, there are a lot of reasons you might not. But if you don't have it, you're not going to be middle class. And the flip side of that is what I said earlier. If you have a high school diploma or less in the coming economy, you will be working poor. These will be the people that you will be figuring out how to pay for their unemployment insurance, how to pay for their health care, and in many cases, how to pay for their prison time. So it is a prerequisite. It's a key to a strong and equitable democracy. It's important to global competitiveness, and it is necessary or our economy will be at risk. Let me just do a little, I don't want to spend a lot of time on global stuff here, but let me just talk just a moment. Do you notice a pattern for almost every country, every developed country? What's the pattern? The younger workforce is always more educated than the older workforce. They're moving forward. There is one dramatic exception to that pattern on this chart, and I apologize, it's small. It's right here. The United States of America. Our younger workforce is less educated than our older workforce. We are going backwards. That's not a good thing. Okay. Now, overall, even when we're one of the more highly educated countries in the world still, but when you begin to drill down, you say it's not headed in the right direction here. We've heard about slippage. We used to be number 1, now we're number 8, or we're number 9. The point, forget that. We're headed down. We're not headed up. That's not a good sign for global competitiveness for this economy. But it's not all about Korea and Finland. We find we really can't motivate. Korea is one of the most educated countries in the world, Finland as well, but we find we don't get a lot of people jumping up and saying, let's beat Finland. I mean, it doesn't have a lot of play, and I don't know why. It just doesn't, even though, we are competing with Korea and other places for our jobs. Let's look at our own economy. There is also in your packet, and you don't need to look at it just for your reference. Again, it's brief, an excerpt about Idaho. It's a larger study that looks at all 50 states in the nation called Help Wanted. We funded this along with other foundations. It was done by one of the nation's leading labor economists, Tony Cannavale, at the Georgetown Center for Education and the Workforce. And it looks at what's going to happen to the labor market between now and 2018. I don't mean to get you confused with dates. Our goal is 2025. We're giving ourselves a little breathing room. But apparently doing these labor market projections beyond 7 or 8 years is too much crystal ball gazing, so they went to 2018. This is what they found. Well, let me first of all, what they predict is, and we're seeing a little lag in this, but job growth will start to return here in the next few years. But what will those jobs require? And just pay attention to the blue part. The blue part is the portion of the workforce that will require college. Graduate degree, bachelor's degree, associate's degree, some college. Go back to 73. The brown part are your high school graduates and your high school dropouts. I think the pattern is clear. In fact, 63% of the jobs in this country in 2018 will require some form of post-high school education, 63%. So if we don't make these changes and we don't begin to move the dial, who's going to fill those jobs? I was just watching a video that the Albertson Foundation, and there was an Idaho employer here was talking about how he was having to, he has jobs for skilled people, but he's having to send them to Seattle or send them other places because he can't find the skilled people he needs. That's what will happen writ large in the country, right? We won't be offshoring low-skill, low-pay jobs. We'll be offshoring high-skill, high-pay jobs because we won't have the people to fulfill them in this country. And we hear all these, particularly in the light of this Great Recession, you always have the story of somebody who knows somebody whose cousin got a college degree and they're driving a cab, right? And they don't have a good job. Now, they were probably a philosophy major, but I won't go there. But in any case, but I invite you to look from 70 to 2005. This is the unemployment rate and the dips. We've been through like 7 recessions during this time period. But you look at the unemployment rate for the blue, which is bachelor's degree and above, and those for the high school dropouts. I just draw the dramatic contrast. I could have put associate degree. I mean, they play out pretty much the same. So you can see the difference here, even in recessions. And then, just to take this a little further, from November 2008 to November 2009, right in the depths of the Great Recession, that's the unemployment rate. So even when we were the bachelor's degree and above, it's still around 5%. For high school dropouts, it's 15% and sometimes more. So, just ask yourself, which group do you want to be in? Do you want to be in the one that has a 1 in 20 chance of being unemployed? Or do you want to be in the one that has slightly less than 1 in 5 chance of being unemployed? So it does matter. There have been other studies, and I'm going to spend a lot of time with it, done by MIT. This is where we're headed. The middle skill jobs, the classic one here would be the person who worked on the GM line, who could, with a high school diploma, at one point get a job, benefits, a reasonable wage. The middle skill jobs are going to, that's what's going to happen to them. What we're going to see is dramatic increase in the high skill jobs that require the post-secondary college education and in the low skill jobs. So that's where you're going to end up, one way or the other. And your education, economic well-being and education are aligning in this country today. They've always been connected, but in ways that are more powerful than we've ever seen before. So why is the big goal important? Because with the Help Wanted report and other research, by 2018, 30 million new and replacement jobs will require some college or above. 73 million jobs will require associate degree or above. And guess what? If we hit 60%, guess how many educated people that produces? Right around 72, 73 million. We didn't throw a dart at a wall and come up with this 60% number is what I'm saying. This is generated by really looking as hard as we know how to look at what's happening to the economy. Well, enough about the nation. Let's go to Idaho and what's going on there. And again, you have from Help Wanted and from our Stronger Nation report, a couple of briefs there about Idaho's education situation and its economic projections. All right, this is what it looks like with the 2008 American Community Survey. Now the 10 census is coming out. We'll update this shortly, but this is the most recent data that we could get for this report this time. And I mentioned adults before. I want to point something out here, and you are just totally, I know every state thinks they're unique, but in this particular sense, you are totally typical. Some college, no degree. These are people who actually went to college in Idaho or somewhere and came out with nothing. No degree, no credential. That is over a fourth of your workforce. That's 216,729 people. Remember when I said you needed 1,688 additional degrees each year, every year? You got 216,729 people out there with some college, many of them within a semester or within hours. Sounds to me like some fruit you ought to be trying to pull off the tree. Now, it's not as easy as it sounds. We just did a major funding initiative in October of last year across the country with programs that are at scale, planning to bring thousands and thousands of these people back. It's a lot of work. They're not going to come back and live in a dorm and go to class between 10:30 and noon on Tuesdays and Thursdays. They have lives, they have jobs, they have families. You've got them. There's a lot of work, and we've done a lot of that work, and we know what needs to get done. So we can certainly be of help if you're interested in targeting that group. Where else do you need to pay attention to get your degrees up? Well, you've got some gaps here. But you look at these are adults now. This is not your pipeline. These are your adults. And you see here dramatic differences. White population 37.3%, Hispanic 13.8%. what we found nationally, obviously the Hispanic, Latino population is by far the fastest growing population in this country. And it's fast growing here in Idaho as well. Indianapolis, Indiana, for heaven's sakes, is the city with the fastest growing Latino population in the country. We're not as big. We don't have as many of that population as Miami or some, but we're the fastest growing. In the nation, what we have is the fastest growing population in the country by far has the lowest college going rate. That's not a recipe for economic success for anybody. So, now these gaps are the product of the leakage in the pipeline you've got in K-12 to higher ed. So it's related, right? You wouldn't have this, at least in part, if you didn't have. So you need to address that along the pipeline. So a lot of words here. Let me just highlight a few things. By 2018, Help Wanted says 61% of the jobs in Idaho, 503,000 jobs, will require post-secondary education. That's compared to a national average of 63%. But over that 10-year period, and we're already to 2011, 239,000 job vacancies will appear in Idaho, of which 146,000 will require post-secondary credentials. Now, when we say job vacancies, we mean new jobs and jobs that come open because of retirement. And again, I want to emphasize this point. This requirement for post-secondary is not because we're getting this whole set of new kinds of jobs. The current jobs are changing and evolving in their technical and skill demands. Also, post-secondary education jobs will grow by 65,000, while jobs for high school graduates and dropouts will grow by only 30,000. This is the point I wanted to make in relation to if you read this report, Idaho ranks 3rd nationally in projected need for associate degree holders. If you look at that Help Wanted report, it not only lays out your numbers, it even breaks it out by sector. What kinds of degrees in what sectors are you going to need to meet the emerging needs of your economy? And you rank 3rd nationally in projected need for associate degrees and 27th overall in post-secondary education intensity. That's a word they use in the report. It just means how intense is the demand for you to grow your post-secondary degree population. And every state I know, and I'm sure it's true in Idaho, you've got economic development work going on, right? And any success that economic development has in attracting jobs in folks in Idaho is probably only going to intensify that number if you've got the right economic development strategy. If you don't get to college, you're going to be working poor. Who do you want to doom to that? I was in a conversation with a group of public school superintendents one time, and I laid out an earlier version of this data, and I showed them how if you don't go to college, you die sooner, you're less healthy, you're 3 times more likely to be unemployed, you make less money, on and on and on. And at the end of that, we were having a conversation, and one superintendent, who shall go nameless, said, "But Dr. Applegate, you got to know, some of these kids just aren't college material." So I did have to count to 10. And I said, "Well, Mr. Superintendent, you know your students," and I knew which students he's talking about. They would be, a lot of them would be of a particular skin color. They would be of a particular income range. The way we're doing college access opportunity now in this country, you know one of the most powerful predictors of who goes to college and succeeds? Well, zip code. You could use zip code as a predictor. Now, unless you believe that potential and intellectual capability is defined in this country by zip code, and if you are, raise your hand. I'd like everybody to notice. We've got a system that's not working correctly. But what I said to the superintendent, just to finish that story, I said, "Mr. Superintendent, you know your students better than I do. So here's the deal. I'm not going to question your education judgment. But I'd like for you to convene in a gym somewhere in your district, a meeting. And I want you to invite all the kids that you and your professional education and judgment have decided are, quote, not college material. Invite them to bring their parents or their foster parents or whoever cares about them. I will come, and I will promise you, I will come at your convenience, and I will show all these slides about what it means if you don't go to college. And then I want you to tell them, in the interest of transparency, that you have deemed them not college material." And I said, "You know, if they're okay with it, I'm okay with it. We're making decisions for kids in ways that we shouldn't be." So how do we achieve this big goal? What's involved? We spent a lot of time thinking about this, looking at this. We launched a strategic plan a year and a half ago. We think we know what needs to happen to make this happen at the national level, in states, in cities, across the country. First of all, we've got to focus on who we have to focus on, 21st century students. We quit talking about non-traditional, or we got tired of having to put in, okay, we're concerned about students of color, low income, adult learners, first generation. They are now the majority of our college students. I find when I go to D.C. and talk to staffers and people on the Hill, they all, because they're staffers on the Hill, they all came from Indiana, they came from Notre Dame. If they're from Ohio, they came from the Ohio State University. Their vision is still of 18-year-olds graduating from high school, going to college, living in a dorm, attending the Boise State football game, rooting for a national championship, and moving on. That is not American higher education today, folks. Now, it's not. My son's going to be one of those going to one of those traditional campuses, so I want to care about those kids. I don't want to dump them. But overall, that's not. It's the 21st century student, and we've got to think about that broad array of people we need to serve, adults and others. We need quality degrees and credentials. I won't belabor this. We're doing a lot of work around how we define quality in higher education around our degrees and credentials. Part of that is ensuring that they're aligned with workforce needs and produce wage and employment differences. It's not the only thing, but it's part of it. And how we have to create more productive, high-performing systems. Now, let me be clear. We can't cut our way to this goal. We can't. The state of Louisiana is expecting to reduce the higher education budget next year by almost a third. At a time, and the employers in Louisiana who come to our place say, this is crazy. Yeah, we may continue to drill here because this is where the oil is, but we don't have to keep our headquarters here. We don't have to keep our R&D here. And we will import skilled workers that we need on those wells, probably more skilled given what we recently had, but anyway, more skilled workers on those wells because if we can't find them in Louisiana. But the flip side of that is we need higher education with you, the legislative and the policy leadership, and with employers needs to have an honest conversation about productivity. Joe Cummins, who retired recently as the head of the head of Cummins is on our board. And for the last 10 years, Cummins has done very well. And in talking with him, I mean, advanced manufacturing, these other areas have been at this for a long time. And it's looking at your cost drivers, it's figuring out how to reinvest the money around what matters, which is student success. I'll give you one quick example. University of Maryland system, Britt Kerwin, who's a friend of mine there, launched an efficiency and effectiveness initiative. And they really looked at how they were spending their money. And in your packet, again, is a short, but a little longer than 2 pages, report called Navigating the New Normal. And it's around what states and systems are doing to become more productive, to better use the money they already have to really produce more students with quality degrees. And there are numbers of examples in there that you can look at, but I'll just talk about Maryland. So they looked, and it's a couple of examples. Maryland system has 20 plus, 27, 26 campuses. They were letting every campus buy its own energy on its own. Well, that's crazy. That's not the way you get the best price. So they redesigned that, and they did a system contract, and they saved $10 million the first new contract they signed. It turns out that probably the majority of the money to be saved so it can be reinvested in student success is on the non-academic side of the house. But there are also a number of things that can be done on the academic side of the house. We need leaner, meaner curricula, okay, that really do provide pathways for students. The complexity of the curricula we have at most institutions is an invitation for low-income and first-generation adults coming back to get lost. We can't afford to have as much offered as we do now. We have to get students to degree on time. The Southern Region Education Board just did a study called Time to Degree in the South, which they define from Delaware to Texas. In many states, the average number of hours, if you don't know this, you should ask your institutions to tell you, the average number of hours that a student graduated with a bachelor's degree was 146 or 7 hours in a 120-hour degree. And for associate degree, which is supposed to be a 60-hour degree, it was in the 80s. We want to talk about cutting the cost of education for the student and for the system. Get students out on time, accelerate their progress with the degrees. So there's a lot of those different kinds of examples in that report, but we really need to have an honest conversation. Higher ed needs to come to the table ready to talk about how it's going to launch productivity initiatives. I was just meeting with the chancellor of the City Community Colleges of Chicago. She is launching an effort like this that is quite impressive. So This is being done around the country. It's not the most popular conversation to have for higher ed, but it is essential. We do believe there's 3 critical outcomes that have to be achieved. These are not rocket science. You probably could have thought of these all the way. They are increase the number of students who are prepared academically, financially, and socially for college. And we believe all 3 of those are important. The research would tell there's a lot of focus, and rightly so, on academic preparation. But the research will tell us that that alone is not enough. You've got to have financial preparation. You've got to be able to, if you can't afford it, you can't go. And then there's also got to be social preparation. One of my friends who does research in this area calls it making sure students have the college knowledge they need to succeed in college. So that's crucial. We've got to really expand. That's the traditional K-12 pipeline. That's what the superintendent was talking about today in terms of focusing on students. I will tell you, though, again, with that new finish line, if you don't, I don't think you have one here in Iowa, but I would suggest if you're going to get this nice new longitudinal data system, that you do something that a lot of other states do. Annually, they publish what's called a high school feedback report. And what it will tell you is where every graduate, to those who went to college, how many graduates went to college, where they went to college, how they did, whether they went into developmental ed, whether their grade point average, and whether they survived to the second year. And when we did this in my state, when we did that report, we sent it to chambers of commerce, we sent it to mayors, we sent it to local media outlets, because my goal was that high school X, who has a tremendous football rivalry with high school Y, actually it's Boyle County and Danville in Kentucky if you want to know the names, would get as upset when they fell behind them in their college going and college success rates as they did when they lost to them in football. That was my goal. I didn't achieve it, but at least I had a good goal. We do have to increase the success rates in higher education. A lot of work needs to be done so that once we get students on campus, we keep them there and get them to a credential degree. That's why we haven't been doing that, and that's why we have all those people with some college and no degree. And then the productivity piece I've already talked about. We really have to expand our capacity. So let me move now, perhaps most relevant to you. We think there are a set of state policies that need to be put in place to have a high-performing state that has a shot at reaching this 60% goal and having a healthy, vibrant economy by 2025. I just want to highlight these, and they do fit. Some of them fit with some of what the superintendent was talking about this morning. First of all, and Jamie mentioned your longitudinal data system that you're working on. Create a student data system, set goals, and publicly report progress. Okay? No hidden numbers. We're going to lay it all out there and see how we're doing. You know some of that. But it needs to be a data system. And let me tell you, there's some stuff in your packet as well that tells you about what that data system needs to look like. What you want that data system to do, think for a moment as a legislator, and I'm sure you have, what questions would you like to have answered about your education system, K through workforce? And that's what should drive the development of the data system. If you get a bunch of data geeks together thinking about how everybody's going to share everybody's data and they're going to create that great web portal in the sky, you're never going to get there. But there is a delimited set of data points that you need to have in your system that will enable you to answer those key questions. What happens to college graduates in your state? Where do they get employed? How many of them get employed? What's the average wages by program, by institution? I suspect you don't know that. Very few people do. We've got to have that kind of data so we can look at that and begin to have those conversations. Secondly, and this was very relevant to the superintendent's presentation today, align, match high school graduation and college placements requirements. We have this huge disconnect. It is wrong that a student comes out of high school with a B average in math and ends up in remedial mathematics at an institution. But let me tell you, that may not always be the high school's fault. I spent all my life in higher ed, so I can say this. It may be they learned the math that was taught in the high school very well, but it wasn't the math that was taught in the college. It's like they're roaring down the high school interstate, doing pretty well, but someone forgot to tell them the college interstate starts a quarter mile to the east, and they go off the end. So you've got to have those conversations to ensure that alignment. Now, I know that Idaho is a governing state in the new Smarter Balance work to create these high school assessments that can be used across states that are supposed to set the standard for college readiness, aligned with the new national voluntary standards, which you've also, I believe, adopted. So if you go about this, I would just really encourage you not to think of it as let's get together in our state and just do our, let's get this problem solved. You are already a part of this. We're funding some of that work with Smarter Balance and Park to really make sure that higher ed is going to use those assessments to make it matter to students when they do well on them so they don't go into developmental education. Establish a state college outreach network. The Albertson Foundation with Go On is working on that. We really do believe you need that. We're working in 16, soon to be 19 states to make this happen. There are others in other states. There's good examples of how to set up such a network and how to make it work. This is the network that provides the wraparound services. This is back to my point about it takes more than just academic preparation. We're working with a national Y. We'll be launching college preparation work in 100 Ys across the country because 70% of the students they serve are the students we're trying to reach, to raise aspirations and work with parents. You really, it is integrate developmental education into degree and credential programs. Developmental education is a disaster. I would say we need developmental education. If you're going to have all those adults come back to college, you better have some effective program that helps them get up to speed when they come back. If you put me back in right now a rigorous college math course, you better give me a little help or I'm going to struggle. I haven't done that work in a long time. We need, and if we do have students who need help, but we need to do it effectively. In many community colleges around the country, they have 6 to 9 levels of developmental math that you have to work your way through before you ever get to real math. When I heard that, I thought of Dante's Circles of Hell. You know. And let me tell you, if you go into one of those lower levels, your chances of getting to a degree or credential are, as one former governor friend of mine used to say, slim to none, and slim just left the room. Okay? So make it work. And one of the ways you do that is to begin to focus on assessing students and meeting them where they are. I won't go into detail on this, but there are good models out there. People are developing them that make developmental education work for adult and traditional students. The Gates Foundation just invested $16 million in our Achieving the Dream program to look at what really works in community colleges on this. Divide a common college core with a clear transfer path. Transfer is broken in most states. California just passed legislation to fix that problem, which they estimate will save them hundreds of millions of dollars in their system through eliminating duplication of credit, reducing time. We're funding some work to make sure, as you know, you can pass laws. It's the implementation of the laws that makes a difference. And we're funding work to make sure that gets implemented in the way it should to make that happen. There should be no reason that there should not be a seamless transition from 2 to 4 year institutions in your state. You have a new community college. What is happening with the partnership with the 4 year institutions to ensure students are moving seamlessly to that next level? Add online options to all degree and credential programs. That's what's got to be done to increase capacity. And there are ways, when I say online programs, sometimes people have in their head like the old TV programs. You know, one way you sit there and watch somebody talk on in this case on a computer instead of on television. There are innovative models being used out there, you know, where we can create cohorts of people online. Look at Facebook. Look at the various ways in which people are coming together. You can create classes and cohorts. We've been some systems. We got adults meeting in Starbucks coffee shops on Friday because they know in their region they're the ones taking a particular course program from a particular university. But if we don't do innovative use of technology, we can't get there. We just can't do it through bringing everybody to a campus and putting them inside a concrete or brick building. We don't have enough concrete and brick. We just don't have enough. Expand low-cost pathways to workforce credentials so that there's an opportunity for people to take that first step in a way that then is aligned and helps them move forward to other degrees. And define accelerated degree programs. There again are some wonderful models in your in your materials. One of the things that one friend of mine who works in this area says, which is exactly true, if you're thinking about first generation, low-income students, adults coming back with complicated lives, time is our enemy. The longer we drag this process out, the more likely it is that life is going to intervene and they will drop out. When we looked at that population that I mentioned earlier, some college and no degree, 22% of the population, 37 million people, we don't see a lot of evidence they academically failed and dropped out for many of them. It was life happened. If you make this 3-year degree drag out to 5, if you make this one-year credential drag out to 2 or 3, if you make this 4-year degree drag out to 6 or 7, the likelihood for these people with complicated and fragile lives is they will not make it. So there are examples we're funding in Indiana, Tennessee, other states where we are finding ways to accelerate the progress and enable students to get to degrees faster. Not diluting them, not reducing the learning outcomes that are required, but speeding the process. Provide degree credit through assessment of prior learning and work experience. The research is clear. When adults can come back and get credit for what they already know and start where they are as opposed to starting over, they get their degrees and credentials at much higher rates. And I invite you to your institutions to work with us. We are working with a number of organizations to create a national virtual prior learning center, because this does require time and energy, where you can submit adult portfolios and get the assessment. We were not there yet, but we're working on that, and we're looking for institutions that want to work with us on that. It's really important to, again, accelerate that adult's degree progress. I mean, just to go back, the most poignant example of this is veterans. 2 million veterans coming back from Iraq and Afghanistan. They've taken courses while they've been in the mountains of Afghanistan online. They've learned a little bit about culture and the impact of cultural differences on people. They know a little bit about leadership. They've learned a lot about technology in some areas. And to have them come back and say, sorry, not taught here, doesn't count, is an affront, honestly. So it's for all adults, but I always use that example because we've got to be able to say to people, you know a lot, and we're going to give you credit for that and let you start where you are, not at the beginning. And that will accelerate your progress. Finally, and this is something we are pushing the most strongly in states. We're working in a number of states around the country. And we are willing to come into states and help you think about this in what we call strategy labs. So we would welcome an invitation from Idaho to come in and be a part of your conversations on this topic. It's around productivity generally. But we fundamentally believe at Lumina Foundation for Education that you get what you pay for. And right now in most states, what you pay for at public institutions is enrollment. You have a formula. Most states have a formula, and on a particular census date, around the end of September, October, they count the number of FTE in the room, and that feeds into their funding formula, right? Is that the way it works here in Idaho? Okay. So you know what you're going to get out of it. You're going to get enrollment. Now, the next year, they may have the same number of FTE or more. What could be the case is they lost 1,000 students over that year, but they replaced them with 1,000 more, right? So what you get is this kind of revolving door activity. So if you really, we believe, if you really, with your public institutions particularly, really want to incent, I mean, people are rational people. They do what the system tells them they need to do to get their rewards. If you say, folks, moving forward, and this has to be phased in, it's complicated. Again, there's Ohio, Tennessee, Indiana, some states that are far along the road on this. But ultimately, 10% of your base, not a little extra fund out here that you can win if you do better getting students to completion, as if that's something extra that you do. That is your job. But 10% of your base budget will be in part geared to your improvement of the number of students you get to degrees. If that's what you pay for, that's what you're more likely to get than enrollment. And Arizona is on the verge of doing this. Texas is getting close to doing this. We're working with states because we really believe that could be a fundamental shift. Integrate higher education and workforce policy. We have a workforce development system in the United States. It's called American Higher Education. And we need to integrate at the state, federal level between labor and education, at the state level, our workforce education so that WIBs and one-stops and community colleges and universities are together on this so that it is an aligned pathway for people to get to workforce valuable credentials and degrees. And in the majority of states, we don't have that. We have lots of stuff going on over here on the workforce side, one-off trainings for businesses and things, and then we have community colleges over here working on some stuff and some four-year institutions, and it is not connected. And it has to be connected at a policy level. I had a wonderful forward-thinking Secretary of Economic Development in my former state. When he came in, he was a retired UPS executive, and he traveled around the state, And he visited all these county judges, and of course they all wanted him to find a way to bring and build a plant on some flat piece of land they had in their county. Right? That's what they thought his job was. And his first question to every county judge in every county in Kentucky was, what's your high school graduation rate? What's your college going rate? What percent of your population in this county has a college education? And he said he never found a county judge who knew the answer to any of those questions. It wasn't relevant. Well, it is relevant. And we've got to pull these different aspects of the system together. It's much like K-12 in higher ed. We've got to get workforce in higher ed together on this. And lastly, and there's some material on this in what you have too, get somebody to do a policy audit of all your rules and regulations that get in the way of the system being effective and efficient and serving more students. I've seen Midwest Higher Education Consortium is the national leader in helping universities come together for group purchasing, and they save institutions a lot of money. But I'm amazed at the number of states where that runs afoul of some state regulation in terms of joining that group purchasing across state lines. There's so many examples like that, and it's things that it's just the way we've always done it. And can we strip those away, and then it's a quid pro quo. We strip those away, then you do what you're supposed to do to become that lean, mean education machine that we want you to be for the state of Idaho.